So I recently watched the third and final chapter of this interesting mystery/documentary video series by YouTuber NoParking Berry, discussing the existence of an extra season of Grim and Evil, and in that video he stated that Ultimate Evil, in spite of being the last episode of Evil Carne that had aired on TV, it was more than likely made before the second season given the pretty blatant traditional set of designs. And then he also proposed the idea that 5 o'clock shadows could have also been the case, but this was a little more debatable and he settled it's just a simple possibility. However, I'm gonna drop the ball and openly declare that I definitely do believe 5 o'clock shadows at the very least was probably not produced as a season 3 episode, and I somewhat have proof for this. Let me first put into the table what I find to be the easiest evidence to back up. And this is not the only area I could explore. I would also argue that the writing feels a little bit different. Episodes that came after Jacked Up Halloween had a bigger tendency for its humor to be a little more dialogue driven, relying on their wit and clever subversive conversations. That's not to say that it didn't exist in earlier episodes, but if you watch season 1, you're gonna notice that there's a bigger emphasis on visual gags to carry the episodes, while a lot of them having the accompanying music stand out at a much bigger scale than the later seasons. And again, I'm not saying the writing style was super different. Later seasons also have visual gags and not very dialogue driven skits, but I still think the balance of these two styles of writing are different between these phases of the show's run. Now, I don't necessarily think that the writing approach present in 5 o'clock shadows is exactly the same as that of season 1. I'd say it's a little more similar to season 2, especially because of the pacing of the conversations, but I would also say that it has an abnormal amount of scenes with less reliance on dialogue, coming off as atypical of season 3 and more so reminiscent of season 1. I mean, if you think I'm bullshitting, fine, I'll propose to you a challenge. Try watching this episode in the middle of watching season 3, pretty much at the exact broadcast order. If you can come to me afterwards and say that it felt virtually no different than the rest of them, I'll at least reconsider your skepticism. Something else worth noting is that 5 o'clock shadows is around 14 minutes long. Now, if this is supposed to be a season 3 episode, why would it just be 11 minutes long, like everything else? What incentive could they have to make the episode this long, unless they were expecting a 7-minute long segment to be aired alongside it? Now, whether or not this means they were planning to have Ultimate Evil or just some other episode to share the open space is highly debatable, and I don't really want to get into that, because the main point I'm really trying to make is that the only era where this length could have been convenient was in 2003. Back when both Billy and Mandy and Evil Carne were releasing 7-minute segments to fill the half-hour episode broadcast. I think with all of this information, I can safely say this episode likely aired way after it was actually produced. And so the question becomes, when exactly was this made? I definitely do think it was after season 1. It might seem contradictory because of the Mandy quote comparisons that I made, but the reason why I'm pretty sure it's the case is that not only because of the pacing thing that I mentioned earlier, but also the character designs aren't exactly the same. They look more like season 2 than season 1, especially during indoor night shots. I think the best episode to compare this to is Little Pork Chop, where some shots have a nearly identical color palette that's almost impossible to find other episodes that share the exact same visual resemblance, especially in season 1. It also helps that Brett Farron storyboarded both episodes, and so for instance, Mandy has very similar facial expressions. There's also this shot where Billy's entire house looks dark. Very similar aesthetic can be seen in 5 o'clock shadows, so I don't think it's too presumptuous to say that these episodes were made around the same time if they end up looking this similar. But there's actually another piece of evidence that pretty much annihilates the possibility of this being a season 1 episode, which is that in every segment, plus the Jacked Up Halloween special, during nighttime, the living room in Billy's apartment was blue. This has been a thing ever since the official Grim and Evil days, until season 2 came along and it changed to green. The color blue now only really applies to daytime. Now, I can't confirm this application to every apartment, but definitely in Billy's living room. And guess what? In 5 o'clock shadows, the room looks pretty green if you ask me. So yeah, there is no denying this is definitely a post-season 1 episode. As far as whether or not this was the first one produced after season 3 of Grim and Evil, it's a little more vague, but given how it shares some common traits with the past, I think you could argue this was going through a similar transitional phase like Ultimate Evil. But hey, don't trust everything I say because I don't know shit about fuck.